It's time for Market Explainer, your number one business news podcast. Hosted by Danny and the big man. And it starts right now.
All right, so this next story, Kmart.
Attention Kmart shoppers.
Right. So all of the references that he's going to make to Kmart, because weren't you a manager to Kmart? Is that correct?
I was an assistant manager to Kmart. I was also a pharmacy technician. I
Okay.
actually met my wife's grandmother before I ever met what would become my wife, years before, in the Kmart that I worked at. Wonderful lady, right?
Didn't you say that Mary? Yeah, didn't you say Mary Kay? Mary Kay Letourneau is different. I'm saying Mary Kay of Mary Kay Cosmetics. Didn't she used to come into the Kmart pharmacy where you worked?
No, that was Walgreens. That was after Kmart. Kmart was my first big job outside of bagging groceries. Like, it was my first, I went from bagging groceries to Kmart as a cashier, right? Stock boy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then moved up the ranks from there. But look,
should we really say that it was a big job? Is that what we should say?
At the time it was. I mean, you're talking about early 90s, right? So at the time in the early 90s, Kmart was thousands of stores across America. Kmart was Walmart before Walmart was Walmart, right?
Right.
You went to Kmart for everything. If it wasn't at your local grocery store, your Bob's, and again, I grew up in the country, right?
Yeah.
So if it wasn't at Bob's grocery store or Minyard's grocery store, or whatever local grocery store you go to, you went to the closest Kmart, right?
Right.
Because they had everything else. They were the first, or one of the first, especially in the South, big box stores like a Walmart before Walmart. They didn't used to carry food, and then they tried to get into that in the 90s because you had places like your Walmarts and other places started to add food and stuff like that.
Right.
They made the of course, attention Kmart shoppers became a whole, it's in movies like Beetlejuice, right? He comes up and says, well, attention Kmart shoppers.
So, this story is a example of the difference between a Gen Xer and a millennial. I don't know what the heck this guy's talking about. Well, I've been into a Kmart. That's not true. I've been into a Kmart probably 10 or 15 times in my life. And I remember the last one that was in, not the town where I grew up, but the town where my high school was, because I went to high school one town over. They had a Kmart. And that was kind of the place, you could go in the back of the Kmart and to the behind the Kmart. Yeah. That's a place where you did less than honorable transactions with people in the alternative economy, and nobody would. But if you go to the back of the Walmart and do that, they're stocking and there's trucks coming.
When the Kmart was first around, that was a really nice neighborhood, right? When the Kmart was at its peak, that neighborhood was a really nice neighborhood.
Oh, 100%.
And when you were growing up, it was not, right?
Yes.
Because the Kmart didn't move. So look, a lot of things have led to the Kmart downfall, but it was very pop culture in the 90s. Rain Man, if you've ever seen the movie Rain Man, I got to go to Kmart, got to buy underwear, got to go to Kmart, got to buy. I mean, it made it into movies and stuff like that. The blue light special thing, you're probably not old enough. Actually, I'm 100% you're not old enough to actually remember. Blue light specials were these things. You can probably still see the old commercials. But they used to literally, as a way to get people in the store in the middle of the day, in the 80s and early 90s, they came up with what's called the blue light special. Right. It could come out at any time during the day, and it was for an hour. And they would announce it over the intercom, so it wasn't on radio, it wasn't on TV or whatever. If you happened to be in the store, they had this cart with a big blue light on the top, and they would go to a certain section of the store, and they would be like, all right, these items on this aisle are 80% off. Something insane, right? But only for the next hour. And it was, the light would go off, and it would just... Almost the whole store could see this blue light going off and where it was, and people would just flock to that, and it was a way to get people in the store in off times, right?
Yeah, so if they had that if Kmart was still a factor today, and they're saying that there's one in New Jersey, it's about to close, and then there's only going to be 3 Kmarts in the country.
Right.
If that was still operating today, here's how Gary Vee would react to it. All right, guys, what you need to do is you need to stake out the Kmart, you need to wait for the blue light special, you need to buy out all of the shelves, and then you're going to put it on Amazon, and you're going to make 100,000. That's Gary. And I love Gary.
100%. That would be Gary V's tip for a week if this still existed. 100%.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
So, the reason this is interesting to me is we have this belief, or there's a belief. If if you're on social media, people talk about these mega corporations. They exist forever and ever. It's like, no. Here's Kmart, who was, like you said, Walmart before Walmart. They pioneered big box retail. They literally invented a flipping category, and they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
IBM.
Well, they invented more than that. They invented layaway.
Yeah.
Before everybody could have a credit card, they invented layaway, where you could put something on save and pay for it out over, I forget how many weeks, or 10 weeks or 20 weeks, or however many it was. They invented that as literally a way for people to buy higher priced items. You know what I mean? For your average family and kind of stuff. That they started a lot of what we now consider normal. Right? That Target picked off of, Walmart picked off of, or whatever. Yep. And like a lot of companies, because Kmart eventually was bought by Sears.
Right. No, all the way around. Kmart bought Sears.
I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
And so they combined as a company, and then both died as a company as well. Right? So, because they both suffered from the same problem.
Right.
They thought, like Blockbuster, what we do is so good it'll last forever.
Right.
And it didn't.
Right. And I still remember it was maybe 10 years ago now, there was a Kmart commercial on one of the Super Bowls. It was called the Ship My Pants commercial. And obviously, you know what they're alluding to and they're trying to say.
Right.
It's a hilarious commercial. To this day, still some of the best television marketing I've ever seen. That's my opinion. It's well done, all this other stuff. But here's the problem. I don't care. Right?
Well, but by then there was no Kmart around you. But by then they closed so many stores that by that time, and again, look, the first time they filed for bankruptcy was 2002, 20 years ago. They've limped from bankruptcy to being dead for 20 years. And during that 20 years, less and less stores. Every time they tried to revive it.
Yeah, so let me ask you this question. If you're Kmart, why aren't you just going, all right, let's just die? What are we doing this for? Like, it's kind of like if, and I know somebody kind of in this situation where it's like, well, your diabetes and everything else is so bad. We can keep treating you, but we're going to have to take a bunch of your limbs. It's like, all right, let's just stop all the treatment. Let's go to the old country buffet and let's just call it. It's like, what are we doing here? Right. So my question is, why don't they do that?
You're talking from a business standpoint, and I'm going to make a non-business thought process. When you close stores, you lay off employees.
Yeah.
You now have a place that neighborhood no longer has access to for food, for milk, for clothes, for whatever. You are lowering the amount of competition in a given area for retail. Sure. All of these dominoes that fall when you close a big store. Now, you could also make the argument that, hey, every time they had to close 200 stores at a time, didn't that do that anyway?
Right.
But there's a reason that there's these 3 stores are the 3 stores left over, right?
And isn't it going to be the case that those people are going to go work at the Dollar Tree, and the Dollar Tree is going to eat up a little bit of Kmart's market, and Walmart's going to eat up a little bit of Kmart's old market? I still remember there was a huge deal, like the Kmart in downtown Minneapolis. This is a little bit before my time, but my dad used to work in downtown Minneapolis and used to tell me, like, there is a Kmart that they had to build a highway around because the Kmart just refused to close. And I think it was in the last 5 years that this Kmart finally closed, and they were able to just railroad right down it like they've been trying to do for 25 years. And there's a lot of things to think about here, but one of the things is this concept that in market economics, that all that happens is oligarchs just get rich and they're rich forever is like, no. Kmart was out there. It's dead now. There are children born today complaining about workers' rights and all this other stuff that I think is stupid, that don't know that this company existed and went out of business before you were born. But your parents and grandparents went to a place that you can never go to because it just went out of business. And between Amazon, it's interesting though, is like Sears was the original Amazon, right?
Yeah.
It was a catalog that had everything in it, and they shipped it to your house. You could buy a kit home, a kit car. You could buy literally soup to nuts from Sears catalog. And you told me once you and your brothers in the early 1900s ordered a car from there, and your brother takes his belt off and put it, and then you crank it in the front. It's not that old.
Look, no. But the point is and Sears became a cornerstone for every mall in America, right? An anchor for every mall in America. People, tools and stuff. Again, but when you think about one of the things, and I like about this story is they interviewed a couple of people from like where these stores were dying and closing down and stuff, and that same nostalgia kept coming back. Kmart was an icon of that the from the 60s all the way through the 90s. It was an icon because it was the first of what it was doing. Going to Kmart they were clean, they were well lit, they were they had pharmacies in them, which was a new thing. So everybody could get their prescriptions. So it became part of the community. It was a very nostalgic. I remember all of us going to go ahead.
No, I was going to say, before Kmart had a pharmacy in every town, how could you get your fentanyl, right? It's extremely hard to get hooked on opioids if your pharmacy doesn't carry opioids. So,
Well, but I remember Kmart was the first big store that I remember as a kid, my parents taking us to go Christmas shopping for the whole family, right? Where you give a kid's money and then you just split up around the store and you're all hiding your cart when you see one of your brothers or sisters or whatever. Like Kmart was that store that we would go to, and my dad would be like, all right, here's $50 you need to buy for your brothers and sisters. You know what I mean? Your mom something or whatever. And you just go out, and that's what kind of place it was. I was actually 3 years in a row the Kmart Santa Claus.
That's about right. You're anatomically sized correctly for that. It's just...
And always have been. So, which was a whole experience for me that I didn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, as a side note, did you know that I do ethnically diverse Santa Claus every year? And I charge $1,000 a party. Yeah. And instead of ho, 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 I say, oh, oh, oh. Yeah.
So, look, when it comes down, you're right. The company should just die at this point. It should have done it. I mean, I think it's filed for bankruptcy at least 2, but maybe 3 times in totality. But as long as someone's still making money, they're going to keep it alive. It's going to zombify.
Right. So here's the other thing. When these Kmarts, as a real estate guy, when these Kmarts have gone out of business, I remember listening to a podcast where a guy's like, the city was just so... like, what do we do with this? It was the mega Kmart or the biggest Kmart. Mm-hmm. He bought it for nothing, turned it into a storage facility, and made a mint on it. So, as an entrepreneur, as a real estate guy and an entrepreneur, I'm looking at all of these big box retailers that are going to die and go, hey, I can buy this and turn it into a thing. So,
well, I mean, Circuit City went through this very same thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? Fry's just went through it last year. You and I did a podcast about it. So these very successful big box companies that at one point were top of the world, right?
Yeah.
Didn't change with the environment for whatever reason. Yep. And a lot of it... Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say this one kind of parting phrase that I think of. Nothing new under the sun. Nothing lasts forever. It's kind of weird, right? We're all just recycling someone else's old genes. That's all we're doing.
Well, but I think change comes in. The older I get, the more I believe in that change is the only thing constant. And if you're not changing and evolving and learning, you will eventually fall down this hole, right?
Hey, man, if you reject change, you've rejected life itself. Like, you've accepted, I'm just going to die now. I'm just going to curl up in a ball and die because change is all there is, and adapting is all there is. And if you look at the kind of slate of Silicon Valley unicorn startups that happened in my youth, the Ubers and Amazons, they have this policy of like, we're going to go disrupt ourselves. And that's an interesting concept. And, because they looked at all the old dinosaurs and said, hey, these people didn't adapt enough. And you look at some of these companies and you go, I think you disrupted yourself out of business.
And that can be true too. I mean, anything in excess is a bad thing, right? So you can definitely change too often as well.
Right.
And that's the hard part, is finding that middle ground. Who are you listening to? Why are you listening to them? And what are you doing about it? All of those can be overcompensated for in one way or the other. And that's what we call life and business and entrepreneurship, folks. I mean, that's the reality, is finding what that really is.
Right. All right, you want to jump into this next one? You ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Before we do that, I'm going to tell you about Avenue Lucky. Avenue Lucky is my agency that develops websites and provides done-for-you marketing services. You can go to avenuelucky.com, learn all about it there.